It was supposed to be a quick drive through the barren stretch of highway. I had driven it 100 times before. That night, though, everything went sideways. My gas tank was low, a little too low, but I'd taken this route countless times before and thought, I'll make it to the next town. 20 miles in, my gas light came on. No big deal, I thought. I kept driving, pushing further into the night. The roads were pitch black, not another car in sight. I kept my music low, only the hum of my engine and the occasional static from the radio filling the silence. Then, the engine stuttered. A small gasp, then a stall. I hit the gas, hoping to squeeze out a few more feet, but it was dead. I was out of gas. There was no shoulder, just miles of dirt, a dark horizon, and silence thicker than I had ever known. I looked at my phone. No signal. Of course, right in the middle of nowhere. Taking a deep breath, I stepped out. The night air was thick and still. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness as I decided to walk. I kept looking over my shoulder, the unsettling feeling that I wasn't alone creeping into my bones. The silence wasn't natural. It was like something was holding its breath, waiting. I must have walked a mile or two, trying to convince myself I was imagining things. Then I heard it. Footsteps, faint but unmistakable, echoing mine. I stopped, and the footsteps stopped. I took a few steps forward, and they matched, a half second behind. My skin prickled as I whipped around, shining my light back the way I came. Nothing. Just empty road and shadows. A low growl came from the darkness, rumbling so deeply I felt it in my chest. My heart pounded as I walked faster. The growling grew louder, closer. Whatever it was matching my pace, staying just out of sight. The footsteps stopped, but I couldn't. The fear was gripping me, pulling me forward. And then I saw it. A faint glimmer on the road ahead. A tiny house, with one light flickering in the window. Relief washed over me. I started running, reaching the front door and pounding hard. After a moment, an old man opened the door, his face worn and eyes tired. "Please," I gasped. "I'm out of gas. Something's out there." He didn't say a word, just stepped aside, letting me inside. The house was strange, too quiet, filled with old, dusty furniture. He motioned for me to sit down, then went to the window, peering outside. His face darkened, and he slowly drew the curtain closed. "You walked through that stretch alone?" he finally asked, voice barely more than a whisper. I nodded, catching my breath. I didn't have a choice. His eyes narrowed. "You should never walk here alone at night." I tried to ask why, but he held up a hand. "Quiet now. It listens." The silence in the room felt heavy. The only sound was my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Then came a new sound from outside, a soft scraping like nails dragged across the wall. My breath hitched as the old man's face grew even paler. "We need to stay here. Don't open that door," he whispered, his eyes not leaving the window. For what felt like an eternity, we sat in silence, listening. I heard it again. The faint growl, low and menacing, right outside. The growling became a series of deep breaths, each one rattling the thin walls of the old man's house. I could feel it, pressing in from all sides, like the walls themselves were holding their breath, trying not to be noticed. The man's hand gripped my shoulder, his knuckles white as he whispered, "Stay quiet, or it'll know you're here." I didn't dare breathe too loudly. The man and I sat frozen, his hand squeezing my shoulder with bone-crushing force. My eyes darted around, looking for something, anything, that could help if it came inside. But the room was bare, stripped down to essentials: a single chair, a dusty lamp, and a few tools scattered in the corner. Nothing that could protect us from whatever was outside. The scraping sound changed. It was at the front door now, then the side wall moving around, circling the house like a predator. The old man's face was gaunt, his eyes darting to each sound. He was clearly familiar with whatever this was, and his fear did nothing to ease my own. His lips barely moved as he muttered, "It's waiting for you to run." I couldn't sit any longer. My nerves were shot, every muscle on edge. I whispered back, "What is it? Why is it following me?" The man looked at me with a pity that cut deeper than the fear. "It's been here long before you or I. Some say it follows lost travelers, like it can smell the desperation." His eyes were wide, fixed on the door as he spoke. "It waits for people like you to walk right into its territory. Once it's on your trail, you can't lose it." My mind raced, trying to piece together what he was saying. The thing outside, it was hunting me. I had walked right into its path. "What happens if it gets inside?" I asked, voice barely a whisper. The man just shook his head, his hand on my shoulder tightening even more. "No one knows," he muttered. "No one who's met its gaze has ever made it back to tell." As he spoke, the door handle rattled. It twisted slowly, as if whatever was out there was testing it, seeing if we'd left it unlocked. My heart froze. The sound stopped, and I could hear a low, guttural growl. Then it shifted again, moving toward the window, where it let out a deep, throaty chuckle. The old man's face drained of color. "It's trying to scare you. Don't move. Don't even look at it if it finds a way in." Just then, there was a loud crack as something hit the side wall. I felt the vibration through the floor, my hand clenched around the edge of the chair. Whatever was outside was testing the walls, searching for a weakness. The man stood up suddenly, moving to a small trapdoor in the floor. "Down here," he hissed, opening it with a slow creak. The darkness below seemed like a black hole, but it was the only place left to hide. He motioned for me to go in, and I didn't think twice. The moment I was inside, he shut the trapdoor above me. The last thing I saw was his wide eyes, staring at something over my shoulder. And then the darkness swallowed me whole. I sat in the pitch black, straining to hear anything from above. The growling was louder now, joined by a strange scraping sound, like claws scratching against wood. Then there was silence. A shiver ran down my spine as I realized something. Whatever it was, it had stopped making noise. It had figured out where I was hiding. In the blackness, my breathing sounded like thunder. I was alone, entombed beneath the floor, waiting for the horror above to either leave or find a way in. I couldn't tell how much time passed. It could have been minutes or hours. My eyes adjusted to the darkness, and slowly, I made out the faint outlines of the walls around me. There was nothing but damp earth and splintered wood, closing in like a coffin. Then I heard it. Soft, deliberate footsteps above. They circled slowly, as if savoring each step, every creak of the wood. My pulse pounded in my throat, and I pressed myself into the far corner of the tiny hidden space, barely daring to breathe. The footsteps stopped, right above me. For an endless moment, all was still. I held my breath, praying it hadn't heard me, praying it would leave. But then, there was a soft tapping on the trapdoor, almost like a knock. 3 sharp taps. Tap, tap, tap. My heart felt like it would burst out of my chest. I held my breath, eyes wide, gripping the walls so tightly that my nails dug into the wood. Then the tapping came again, louder this time, demanding. The silence that followed was worse than the sound. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, waiting for whatever was on the other side to make its next move. Then in a voice barely more than a whisper, it said, "I know you're down there." My blood ran cold. The trapdoor creaked as the thing scratched at the edges, prying at it. Wood splintered. I squeezed my eyes shut, knowing it was only a matter of seconds before it broke through. In my mind, I saw it. Dark, faceless, with twisted limbs and empty eyes, waiting to devour anything it found. But just as I felt the trapdoor shudder, a sudden noise filled the room above. A shout, followed by a loud bang. Then silence. The trapdoor stopped shaking. The air grew heavy with the scent of burning wood. I dared to open my eyes and listened intently, heart still racing. Had someone come to help? Or had it found a new prey? Summoning the last of my courage, I pushed the trapdoor open just a crack and peeked out. The room above was empty. The old man was gone. Only the faint scent of smoke lingered, swirling through the open front door, as if whatever had been there had vanished, leaving no trace. I climbed out of the darkness and stumbled outside. The night was as silent as before, the road stretching into the abyss. The stars shone cold and distant above, indifferent to my terror. As I walked back down the empty road, desperate to get as far away from that house as possible, I kept expecting to hear footsteps behind me, to feel that dark presence at my back. But the night remained silent. Hours later, I finally stumbled onto a gas station. As I approached the counter to ask for help, the clerk looked up at me, his face suddenly going pale. "You came from the old roadside house?" he asked, voice quivering. I nodded, barely able to speak. He shook his head slowly, eyes wide. "That house burned down 20 years ago. It's just an empty lot now. No one's been there since." My blood froze as the realization settled in. The man, the house, everything I'd seen, it wasn't supposed to be there. It was a remnant, a dark echo of something long gone. I left the gas station that night, filled up my car, and drove straight through until morning. I never took that road again, but sometimes, late at night, I swear I can still hear the faint sound of tapping. 3 slow taps just outside my window.